as we're making progress with him, and then we're getting the letters, and he's getting better at sounding out words and getting better at spelling, his wife contacted me. She had my cell number, and she said, Tim, I just have to tell you something. You have to stop helping him. And I said, I'm sorry, what? She goes, I need you to stop helping my husband learn how to read. And she says, don't get me wrong, it's working. He's making progress. But he comes home every evening after he successfully learns stuff with you. And at this time, he's a man in his 40s. And she says, he is so angry at how he was ridiculed, and it was never him. It was actually always the educators and the programs they were using that actually had never been tested and never been proven to be effective. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our Dyslexia Success Stories podcast. I'm Dr. Tim Conway. I'm a neuropsychologist with expertise in developmental difficulties among children, as well as acquired difficulties due to brain injury or stroke, as well as published in neuroimaging, fMRI, brain imaging technologies, as well as published in neurorehabilitation, how to rebuild skills after brain damage, and also published in interventions that help empower any learning difficulties that a student might have, whether you're a child, teenager, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old. And that's what today's topic is today, is let's talk about illiteracy with adults. And our guest today is Theresa Sterling. And Theresa and I worked on a project together years ago, and I'm going to bring her on live now. Theresa, welcome to Dyslexia Success Stories.
Me.
Thanks. Sorry, we had you muted there for a second, and you're unmuted now. So we're glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you. Opportunity, and it's fun just to kind of take a look back because time has passed for both of us, Theresa.
Mm-hmm.
And give us a little bit about your background of how you got involved in adult literacy. And let me start off with just saying we get estimates that there's somewhere between 43 to 51 million adults in the US who struggle with low literacy. And for many of these adults, it's so low they can't even fill out a job application because reading the parts of the job application, spelling to answer the questions, they don't have the skills. It's not IQ related. It's usually more experiential. They may have left school at a young age, or they, had a very transient family, didn't get to be in school very much, or they just were in a school that didn't have very strong educational curriculum. But give us a little bit more about your background, how you got into literacy. I know it's not what you do today, but you still are involved in it in indirect ways. But let's talk about the background piece first.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. My background is, so I've always worked with adults. I do have an education background. I have a master's in applied linguistics, specifically to teach adults who are non-English speakers. I started my literacy work in 2000 with true American English speaking adult learners who struggle with reading in 2008 in Alabama, in Birmingham. And it's just always been my passion to facilitate language learning among adults. And then when I was came back to Florida, and you remember how we met years and years ago, I was hired to run the adult literacy program for Alachua County Libraries, and saw the article on you and on Now in the local Gainesville magazine. And I had been looking for a different approach. And I thought, I need to speak with this gentleman. And so I reached out, and then that was it.
Well, most people may not know that your position at that library is very rare, because your library you're working for actually had a line item budget to fund adult literacy programs. Many libraries don't have that. So I think that's interesting to consider. And yeah, you reached out to me and said, we've got these adult programs, and tell us a little bit about them for people who don't know what might be typically in an adult literacy program at a library or in a community college. What were the typical programs like back then?
Well, library-based, they're all, and to this day, everything I know of, especially in the state of Florida, because I do kind of keep my fingers in that, it's volunteer-driven, and that always presents it's a blessing, but it's also a real challenge, as you know.
Yes.
Hard to manage and really require certain things of volunteers because they could walk at any time. They're not getting paid.
Right.
So that's always a challenge. However, that library district is unique because they really fund the literacy program. So there's basic literacy at that program for adult American English speakers. I developed the ESOL program, ESL or ELL language learning for immigrant adults. And then we started some basic skills programs for folks who had challenges and barriers to formal education. Before I left there in 2018, we had started basic skills just so they can show something on a resume. They stuck with something, they completed something.
Yes.
To help them, with their job search.
Good.
Mhm.
And what was the typical approach of those curriculums? Is it just a flashcard approach? Is it up to date? Is it outdated? Like, I know Lawbach was one of them. I don't remember if you guys had that program.
Yes.
Many library programs did. Tell us a little bit about
Yes.
that. Because most
So
people have no clue. Is there a difference in how we approach adults literacy when they've already gone through the school system? Or are we going to do more of the same? Or how's it done?
that's exactly it. And, thank you for doing the intro into that. I wasn't sure about mentioning specific programs, but when I started working in adult literacy in Birmingham in 2008, that was the program, the Lawbach program. And you and I have talked about this. What was it, 1939 or 1940?
Yeah.
So it hasn't changed in 80 years.
Yeah, and that's not when you and I talked about it. That's when the Lawbach program was built.
That's exactly. Well, that's
It's
true.
been around for right.
80 we talked about the
years.
frustrations.
Yes.
And all the research that has gone on in those decades since. So, but many programs still use it. In fact, I'll drop into the Florida Library Literacy Program for Adult on that call once in a while. And I ask, hey, what are libraries using? And a lot of times it's that.
Yeah.
And that
How does that work? How do they do that? Is it flashcards? Is it phonics? Is it just look at books?
It's little controlled readings. It's picture based.
Okay.
So it's memorization with, a letter associated with a picture that looks like that letter.
Gotcha.
So
some kind of graphic shape made into an ant. The L becomes a lion, or the A becomes an apple, and you're trying to pair on
a bird is a bee, depending on how they pose the bird. So it's, to me, that was an extra step and a memorization, right? Which is why it now really clicked with me. So it's that usually. And then they have, there are some other programs, mainly those in libraries, because it's a tidy program. It's a workbook, it's a teacher's manual, and then you're just off. And then there's ancillary readers and things like that. So it's very contained, it's very inexpensive, and it's just very easy to say, here, tutor, do this. So that's different, I think, from what goes on in schools. But the problem being that whether it's that or something else, often a volunteer tutor, not often, but sometimes they'll revert to, well, this worked for me, this is what I used to do, and then it's flashcards. And that's the challenge of a volunteer-driven program. Even with now, I really had to monitor and check in. And, for one person with, what we have, 12 branches plus a jail branch down there, for the fidelity of the, implementation, it's tough because sometimes people would just revert to, oh, I'm just going to do this flashcard, But like you said, Dr. Conway, why, more of the same thing that didn't work for them through school? Why is it just because you're doing it one-on-one? Why is it going to work better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what research tells us about the brain. If you give the brain the same practice, you should expect the same outcomes, because you're actually not having the brain do any new activities or any new skills in any new way. And typically more of the same doesn't automatically or just spontaneously or just click and now reading skills open up. It's more alike if you're not actually teaching the foundational skills, and the instruction is kind of a silo skill here and a silo skill here, another silo skill up here. You're practicing separate skills, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually building the full functional literacy skills that the brain is capable of building. And so when you and I first connected, what tweaked your interest about how our approach from developmental science, because we're steeped in science of how to literacy skills build for people who don't struggle. We've also done lots of work on how to rebuild reading skills in people who are 8, 10, or 16 who just didn't learn how to read well, or they actually had dyslexia. And we've also published research on how to rebuild reading skills after brain damage. What did you view as was different in how we were approaching it versus those other adult programs we just talked about?
You know, the salient thing after all these years, Dr. Conway, is when you explained to me how it worked, and when I saw, an overview, and then I saw training, and I came to your clinic, visited, saw some things in action, and what it was, because I had been through Orton Gillingham, I had been through Laubach, and just looked at other things, what it was, and things that were branded multisensory. And when I saw now programs in action, I thought this must be what multisensory should look like. So instead of, for people who aren't familiar, instead of, sounding something out and tapping here or tapping your leg or feeling the sandpaper, I get where that might help in some ways. But the multisensory piece with now programs was actually the part that was related to producing the language. So why are you tapping your thigh when what you need to do, what we learned from you, Dr. Conway, is, well, no, the senses we should be tapping into is what's going on when you make that sound. So, and what I loved about that is every learner has that. They have their toolbox right here.
Yes.
So that's what clicked. And I thought, oh, yes, this is where we need to go.
And so I'm going to paraphrase what you're saying, because what I'm hearing you say is you understood that we're talking about how does the brain typically build the language and literacy skills, because it's the speaking skills first, the reading skills later. And we can explain to you, here's how we think the brain typically builds your ability to make the sounds, and then later on learn the letter shape and match it with that sound. And it's not just memorization, it's 4 sensory systems working together. And so we know it's part visual, because babies are watching mom and dad's mouth move by about 8 months of age. And we know now from fMRI studies, if you watch somebody doing something, you watch it intently, the part of your brain that controls what you're watching, whether it's the arm swing of tennis or whether it's the mouth movement of speaking, your part of the brain that controls, the arm over here versus the mouth over here, it's going to become active as you pay attention to it, because the brain thinks that you're going to get ready to do what you're watching somebody do. So I think the baby's watching the mouth move because they're trying to learn how to move their mouth to make the sounds that they see their mom and dad making. And that's the early sensory building. And so it's not just visual, it's not just acoustics. They hear the sounds, they see the sounds, but there's 2 other pieces of sensory information that we think the brain for most people is building together, not everybody. It's missing the piece of how's the mouth moving, the teeth, tongue, and lips change position. You move your mouth in one way to make the sound of a letter T. You move the mouth in a different way to make the sound for a letter B. And it's the visual plus the auditory plus the touch position of the teeth, tongue, and lips plus the sensation of those teeth, tongue, and lips moving that builds that multisensory piece. So what you articulated so well is all multisensory doesn't actually lead to better learning, because shaking your leg or jiggling your leg doesn't actually contribute to being able to build better reading skills or better information. And so understanding how those pieces come together, it's the multisensory piece of how the brain typically builds the skills. What you described and what we know that other programs do, they do multisensory memorization. Let's look at it and try to memorize it. Let's listen to it and try to memorize it. Let's use clay and try to memorize it. That is not the same as developmental science multisensory. And so the experts that I trained with was actually initially was Patricia Conway Lindemood. Later was with a developmental behavioral pediatrician named Dr. Ann Alexander, who was the founder of a transdisciplinary clinic called the Morris Center. And then later with a world famous neurologist named Dr. Ken Heilman. Then we know that all of these sensory systems actually come together and build these skills in a typical fashion. The question is, what do we do when the skills aren't building? And so developmental we find actually can be applied to adults. And let me jump and I'll show one slide real quick because this was actually hard for some folks to grasp, which was this is a paper that we published back in 1998. This was our first foray into using one of the Lindemood's earliest programs called Auditory Discrimination in Depth. Today it's called the LIPS program. And from that early theory, we built what's called in our current version, now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling. We tried it out on an adult who had lost his reading skills after brain damage. And you might imagine other people who get to review this paper before we get to publish it are experts in adult brain injury reading problems. And here I come as this guy who's actually not even finished my PhD yet. And I'm presenting a paper on, I'm going to use a dyslexia program and put that dyslexia program into treatment of rebuilding reading skills for an adult who lost his reading skills after a stroke, which caused part of the left side of the brain to die. Now, Theresa, you might not be surprised that some of the experts in adult language said, you can't do this. You can't use a child's dyslexia program to rebuild reading skills after a stroke. They're not the same. I'm like, well, actually, kids aren't the only ones who have dyslexia. So do adults. And this approach that we use to actually help kids strengthen their phonological skills, strengthen reading, strengthen spelling, it's actually the same approach we use to strengthen those skills with adults. And the analogy I would give is to say, let's pretend we're not talking about reading. Let's pretend we're talking about bicycle riding. If you're 6 and we're going to teach you how to ride a bike, we got to teach you about the handlebars, the squeeze grips for the brakes. If it's got, brake grips. We got to teach you about pedal brakes. If it's got pedal brakes, got to teach you how to lean and balance and pedal, teach you all the basics. Well, what happens if you're 60 years old? You've been alive for 6 decades and you never got a chance to have a bike or ride a bike? Would we teach a 60-year-old differently how to ride a bike than we teach a 6-year-old? The answer is no. They got to learn the same skills. And so we then pushed back on the adult aphasiologists, the adult experts in reading after brain damage. And we said, no, actually, we think we can change these skills. And this paper was our first paper we ever published on rebuilding reading skills after brain damage. And Theresa, you'll understand that for some folks, that's like 1,000 times more complicated than helping someone who dropped out of school early, or somebody who just didn't get good quality instruction, or somebody who's an adult who has dyslexia. This one's much more complicated. And without even telling you what all these lines mean, the question is, does this look like the person got better? And we're going from the beginning that's on the left side of the graph, and the end is on the right side of the graph. And like, well, yeah, there's 3 of them are getting higher, and that's percent correct. There's one that's staying kind of the same. And we'd say, well, the 3 ones that got higher are ones we were working on. The one that stayed the same is the one that we did nothing with. We didn't try to change that skill. So this helped us prove that even when someone has brain damage, the brain's ability to rebuild the skills is lifelong. It exists at any decade of life, and even easier to work on if the learning difficulty is because of lack of experience, lack of instruction, lack of quality instruction, or even if you're an adult with dyslexia as well. You still have the ability to actually make those skills even stronger. So tell us about some of the adults that came to your volunteer program in the Alachua County Library. Why did they come to do literacy training as adults? Why does it matter? I mean, we've got screen readers. Now we have pens. We didn't have pens back then, but now we have pens. Why do these adults still want to have better reading skills? And what was the purpose?
Yeah, I have a few examples that come to mind of our folks. It sounds cliche, but it really is true. Reading just affects everything. It affects life choices, life outcomes, everything, family, household, everything. And I can think of the one learner after I went through several trainings with you and with your staff. I took on a learner because I wanted to be doing what I was supporting my volunteers in doing. And this learner, super talented, which is what we usually found, right? These excellent skills in other areas. This was just a skill that they weren't great at. This young man, and he was young, he was early 30s, had a family, yes, 2 kids. He, born and raised in Florida, born into a citrus family, could tell you anything about that. He is an expert. And he was working for a really good company, and his knowledge base was so great that they offered him a supervisory position. And he knew he struggled with reading, and if he could just, he had to read some technical manuals and take some tests. And he was really nervous about that. And he thought, I have to do this now. And so I worked with him for a while. It was just, sorry about that. It's not me, it's my dog.
No problem.
Okay.
It's animal sound effects for everybody. No worries.
Well, yes, and it would have been worse if I locked him up. So anyway, we worked together. It was twice a week, and we talk about the frequency thing with adults. You can't always do that. So it took longer, but boy, he went through like a champ. He was the model student.
Nice. And what does that mean? Like, how did he progress?
Oh my gosh. He was the guy who was always there. He was always on time. If he wasn't going to be there, he would call. Wow. If he had to schedule something because of his kids, he didn't want to miss. So we scheduled another day in the week, Nice. A lot of our learners, as you know, with adults, life happens, challenges because of their lack of skills. And so other things are going on, and a lot of starts and stops, not with this young gentleman. So he committed to it. And this was about supporting his family and doing well in his work. And he did, and it inspired his wife to go ahead and take those 2 sections of the GED, and she passed, so he really committed to this. And he went through the whole thing.
Nice.
Yep.
And that makes complete sense. It's about the revenue he can generate.
Exactly.
And he's the breadwinner for his family. And I believe it's Portland State University. I believe it was Dr. Stephen Reed. I'm blanking on the last name. But he did a study, and they followed 500 people after high school. And the question was, I believe they were all high school dropouts. And the question was, if they participated in any kind of adult basic literacy training program, did that really change their income? And so they followed these 500 adults for 5 years, and they kept 95% of them tracked, which was amazing in and of itself, because usually you have a lot of loss of participants because they move or they fall off the grid. You can't find them. But they had a whole team of sleuths and like private eye type of sleuths to keep track of this whole group of people. And one of their major findings was, if as an adult after high school, you spent on average 100 hours in adult basic education, and it might be that you spent 2 hours a day, every week, 2 hours a day, every week. So you're doing 10 hours a week, and you do that for 10 months. You've actually spent 100 hours in literacy. Your income was actually going to be about $10,000 a year higher than somebody who didn't do that. So it was one of the first studies that showed that participating in adult basic education really has a big impact on folks' income. And for some families, that additional $10,000 brought them up out of poverty. And so it's not a small impact. It could be a really large impact. And on your other students, no problem. How about the other 2 that come to mind? I think that one's the first one. He's like, this is a young dad. He knows to take this promotion, he has to have better reading skills. And we've seen several professionals. We've seen architects who declined their promotion because the promotion was going to require writing skills, sending out memorandums, speaking in public. And they felt so unsure of their reading skills that even if they wrote down what they wanted to read, they couldn't be sure they'd read what they wrote correctly. And so they were mortified of these additional requirements, even though they had earned the promotion. Absolutely. They wanted the promotion. The family needed them to take the promotion. They didn't want people to realize that they didn't read or spell well, because unfortunately, even to some degree today, people mistakenly equate your reading skills, your spelling skills, and your speaking skills with your intelligence.
Right.
And that's not true.
Exactly.
But that's the fear that people have, and understandably so.
Yep. And think about that stress. I'm
Yeah.
not going to take my promotion and I'm not going to earn $10,000 more because I am so knotted up with, being exposed. And what would that look like, and
Yes.
what would it threaten? I mean, the amount of just stress that you carry doing that.
Yes. Well, and
Uh,
then some people say, well, it's really not necessary to have reading skills. Well, but think of it this way. In many contexts, reading fuels creativity. Reading fuels knowledge. Reading fuels vocabulary. Reading fuels reasoning, problem solving. There's so many skills that come from reading.
mhm.
And others will say, well, they'll get it from listening to books. That can have some of the impact, but it's still not exactly the same impact as when you can read yourself, because sometimes there's stuff you want to read as you're driving in the car, and you can't use a pen to read what you saw on the billboard.
Right.
You can't use a book on tape to tell you what they just saw in a flyer that's posted on the door of the building you're trying to go into. You need those functional reading skills to be able to do more, have more functional abilities.
Mhm.
And we've even had folks, two people come to mind right now. One was a firefighter who couldn't pass the promotion exam. He deserved it, he earned it. If they had asked him to test orally, he could pass it, but that was not offered as an oral test. So some folks can get upset and say, well, they should do that. They should give it to him orally. Yeah, they should, but more importantly, but why not just change the skills for this man so he has both abilities? He
Mhm.
can read and write answers, and he can actually speak and give verbal answers. Why not give him both skills? And what you find is
Mhm.
these adults spend inordinate amounts of time with taking a workaround of 10 steps to get here instead of just a straight through of 2 steps. And it's
Yeah.
exhausting. And here's an example. In the country of Trinidad and Tobago, Archbishop Jason Gordon is dyslexic. He's very public about it. In 2018, he hosted a conference called Hidden Disabilities. He wanted to bring it out into the open to let people know you may not see what somebody's struggling with. You may not know that this person doesn't spell well or doesn't read well or has speech articulation problems or has a stutter. And so you can't always see what someone is struggling with. For him, as a member of the priesthood, of the clergy or he's a father, he's an archbishop, he has to be able to give lectures. And he would not be able to trust that he could actually read what he actually has to say. So he would scan into the computer the sermon, have this computer read it back to him, and he'd listen and memorize the whole sermon. Hours and hours of time he would take to do that, which meant he couldn't go do other things.
Yeah. The workarounds. That's a
Yeah.
huge one. And you
Yeah.
talked about that when in the trainings. Why work around? Why is it you used to talk about I'm a visual learner or I'm a this kind of learner. Well, why don't we just strengthen all the skills? Right. I remember you saying that and everything just made so much sense.
Yeah.
But back to your the adult learners, there are a
Mhm.
couple who come to mind and it does affect all parts of life. And this one, I don't know if people believe this when I tell them this about our learner who I will call Marie. It's not her name,
Yeah.
but in a rural part of the county when I was working down there. And this person just said, I just need some help. I need some help. I can't read. And she was a 0 level,
Yeah.
struggled with the letter recognition. And she took a long time to build her skills. But I do believe she had other things going on that a public
Mhm.
library in a volunteer setting, we aren't equipped
Right.
to handle. And she had a very dedicated volunteer tutor. You probably remember her.
Mhm.
She just stood out and tried to work with Marie 3 times a week. It was
Wow.
always 2, but sometimes 3 because there was so much work to do.
Yes.
But
And
Marie,
she was motivated. Marie
so
wanted
motivated,
these skills.
so motivated. And she was older. I believe she was late 50s
Okay.
at that time, probably around 60. But what is remarkable about this story is that I always met with learners, got kind of build the rapport, get the background, why now, what happened earlier in your education. And she did share that, I just figure I'm in a marriage. He doesn't really care about me. We're pretty much done. We're living together. but he doesn't support me in anything. We're not just connected emotionally. And I have adult kids and I don't want to be a burden. So this is my her last ditch effort. If I don't learn to read so I can be on my own, because we're probably splitting up, my marriage is breaking up, and I don't want to burden my kids, what am I going to do? I'm just going to take myself out of this world. And that is a quote. I'm just going to take myself out because I'm just not going to do that to anybody.
No pressure on the tutor.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
This poor woman, how tragic to get to that point, to feel like your life is not worth living.
That's right.
If you can't get reading, but completely understand. She doesn't feel happy in the marriage that she's in. They're going to be exiting.
Right.
And doesn't want to burden her children because she's worried that she's not going to be able to get a job.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And the third one I wanted to share, just going through my, mental notes when preparing for this learner had a good job, was a really good employee, took up extra shifts. He was the guy you could rely on. Big man, rode a Harley, I would say around 50 years old. And he said, I have to do something. When people are vulnerable, people take advantage, right? No matter what that is.
Yes.
And he was in a marriage. Now, of course, I get one side of the story, but he was in a marriage where he felt, because he couldn't read, he couldn't manage finances, and he felt she was holding that financial control as a type of, emotional, mistreatment, whatever. And he said, I have to be able to do this. I have to be able to pay the bills. I have to know how to write a check and how to read what's on a check. And, and also I've been given the responsibility of, I have to write out some tickets at work, requisitions or something. And he said, I can do that. And I want to be able to do that because I'm preparing to strike out on my own, and I have to be responsible and be able to do these things. But she makes me feel stupid, and she holds it over me, is what he said. And that is emotional abuse. It just affects everything. And so, he worked for quite a while, on his skills. So, I don't know, one of the wonderful things I think, or that I know about your Now program, is our learners have tried everything. It's not like, because often you'll find starts and stops, especially if they're 30, 40, 50, 60. They've been to school, they've dropped out, they've tried adult ed programs, they've tried this, they've tried that. They've tried programs by volunteers at a church trying to do the best they can. But it wasn't the right approach for them. And, I'll just try this. But the way you train folks to work with learners on that first day, it's successful. If it's only the tongue tapper.
Right.
Oh, I get it. Oh, I own that. I can do that. Is that all this is going to be? Well, yeah, it gets a little more involved, but it's a progression. You're going to get there. If you could do that, you can do this. Okay, then I will be back next week. How brave of them,
Yeah.
But it's doable. It's not a bunch of writing that they're going to have to sound it out. Well, that one doesn't work. That one doesn't work,
Which, as a psychologist will say, it's not going to be the things that traumatized you in school, because most of these adult learners actually do have PTSD. They have a post-traumatic stress disorder from years and years and years and years of not learning their letters, not being able to read well, being a poor speller, being made fun of in school. I've had adult learners who are just about, not even 5 years older than me, and they'd gone to elementary school in the 70s in Miami. And they said to me, I was put on a stool in the corner of the room and ridiculed by the teacher because I couldn't read, couldn't spell. I was given a dunce cap to wear as if I was the stupid kid in the class. He goes, I was just traumatized by my school experience because I couldn't learn how to read and spell, no matter how hard I tried. And so when we started working with him, and he's learning the lip poppers and tongue tappers, and we're building that phonological system, and then later we get to letters, because developmentally, that's what everybody typically does. From birth to age 4, you build your speech processing skills, and that's what we call speech to print. Now, I need to add a caveat and say, unfortunately, some folks now have new literacy programs out, and they're incorrectly calling them speech to print literacy programs, but they're actually bringing letters in right away. That is not a speech to print literacy program. As soon as you get the letters, you're in print. Just because you have the child to say the sound first and then look at the letter, that's not speech to print. You're doing both together. That's print processing. In speech first, print later, you're just discovering all the sounds. What do they look like? What do they sound like? How does your mouth move? What's a name for them? And you're building that early sensory motor phonological awareness. So as we're making progress with him, and then we get into letters, and he's getting better at sounding out words and getting better at spelling, his wife contacted me. She had my cell number, and she said, Tim, I just have to tell you something. You have to stop helping him. And I said, I'm sorry, what? She goes, I need you to stop helping my husband learn how to read. And she says, don't get me wrong, it's working. He's making progress. But he comes home every evening after he successfully learns stuff with you. And at this time, he's a man in his 40s. And she says, he is so angry at how he was ridiculed, and it was never him. It was actually always the educators and the programs they were using that actually had never been tested and never been proven to be effective. And this is a really important point because most adults who have dyslexia think, not correctly, but they think their brain really can't learn how to read. And so they're just going to get compensatory, they're going to use accommodations, they're going to listen to books on audio because their brain physiologically cannot be taught how to read. That's completely not true. There's no science that supports that. So instead of having groups that are actually advocating for just talk about their strengths, focus on their strengths, I can tell you, and you've probably seen it true, Theresa, and I'll ask you as a question. I've seen adults who actually didn't have any strengths. Their memory was weak, their reading was weak, their spelling was weak, their speaking skills were weak. They have weaknesses almost across the board. And so when people go around saying, oh, all dyslexics have 5 superpowers, the people who don't have any of them, what they say to me is I'm now being double discriminated against. I already didn't fit in the reader world because I'm not a reader. And I thought my people were the dyslexics. But now I'm finding out that dyslexics actually all have 5 superpowers and I don't have any of them. So I guess I'm not in the dyslexics either. So I'm like, I don't belong to any group. I'm this oddball who must really be stupid.
Yeah.
So it actually has the wrong effect on the person. It doesn't just celebrate their strengths because there's no high caliber research that shows all adults with dyslexia have better creativity or better mental imagery skills or better out of the box thinking. And people will pull up these examples. You know, oh, Steve Jobs was dyslexic. You know, Steven Spielberg is dyslexic. Look how brilliant they are. Well, yeah, but so are all the people in prison and jail. 50, 80% of them are dyslexic too, or illiterate. And it didn't help them much at all, did it? So it's not a guarantee that dyslexia itself gives you superpowers.
Right.
And so tell me if you saw adults who didn't have any strengths or were hard to find strengths.
Yes, there were those, you know, but I guess I don't know if there were people who struggled more than others for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I guess in my work with adults, when they presented, they were, you know, I'm not good at this, I'm dumb. And so of course my thing was, you know, no, there's something in there. We're going to pull that out. You can do this. But, you know, yeah, there were people that had more challenges than others for sure. But, you know, you touch on something that has always stuck with me as well. You know, this labeling thing, right? This labeling, and people don't realize the impact and the whole buzzwords in education.
Yes.
You know, just when people at programs choose curricula, oh, but it's research-based, it's research-based. Well, you know, that's different from evidence-based, but people use that across the board.
Yes.
And they think it's this quality thing. Well, but folks don't think about what they're saying. Think about what that word means, right?
Yeah.
You're
and it used to be that was better than not being research-based. And then we got to where it's actually evidence-based. Yeah. And that was, there's at least some data that said this program worked. And then we got to a level higher than evidence-based, which is randomized controlled trials, evidence-based. But believe it or not, Theresa, there's actually now literacy programs that are called evidence-based in the actual name of the program. And you ask to see the studies, They actually have no published studies at all. And so they actually took the popular vocabulary and put it into the name of the program. But one program in particular, they did a randomized controlled trial and it showed the program wasn't any more effective than what the classroom was doing. And they tried to explain it away by saying, oh, well, the program must not have been delivered properly. I'm like, it was a controlled research study, and you were part of the group who did the study. And, we would hope that you would know if the program was being done correctly when the research was happening. So it may just be that your program is not as effective as you think it is. And so when adults who have learning difficulties and they're dyslexic and they still struggle, they've come to believe that their brain is the one that really is the difficulty. Their brain, quote, works differently. And as a published brain scientist, let me clarify that, because that's not quite the way to say it. It's not that your brain is working differently. It's actually working less efficiently. There's still some activity happening on the left side, and this is where most of the reading skills are for most people. But those parts on the left side, they're not communicating efficiently, and so you only have so much skill. But what we know from interventions and using that Now Foundations program for kids and adults is that when you go back in and rebuild the skills with a properly tested and proven to be effective program, then even adults with dyslexia can change their skills. And when we put them in MRI machines, we measure there's new activity on the left side that wasn't there before. Their brain has actually rewired itself. And I'll challenge adults sometimes to say, so there are dyslexic surgeons, there are dyslexic architects, there are dyslexic engineers. Their brains learned all those skills in those professions. Their brains built the skills they needed to function in those professions. Why would you think your brain can't physiologically build reading skills? Because maybe it's actually not your brain. Maybe we explain to you that unlike healthcare, where in healthcare, everything has to be tested to a high caliber and proven to be safe and effective. That standard doesn't exist in our colleges of education or in our school systems. So basically, any literacy program most every adult today got exposed to, there was never any proof that that program even worked. So maybe your decades of reading problems aren't anything to do with your brain. It's that we still, to this day, do not require the same caliber of science for a reading program as we require for penicillin or a medical treatment or a medical procedure. And until we get the literacy programs pushed up to be just as high caliber as the medical programs, then it's not the brain that's the problem, is that we never did anything that's been proven to work anyway. And let me jump to a quick comment by Cal here, because he's highlighting what we talked about earlier. And Cal, we appreciate the input, and we feel you 100%. School for dyslexic people is traumatizing. Think of it this way. You're going through a job every day, and you actually don't have the skills that you need to perform that job. And you feel like a failure every day. But at school, it's not just every day, it's every hour, every minute of every day, because pretty much in every class, there's reading and spelling. And we are typically struggling with both of those skills. So it's a traumatizing event all day long, Monday, all day long, Tuesday, Wednesday, basically day after day, week after week, month after month. And Cal even says, I was always trying to find a way to leave when we were doing the read alouds.
Yeah.
So before my turn, I'd go to the bathroom. I'd go to the nurse. And otherwise, I had to read my paragraph 10 plus times to get it memorized before it was my turn to read out loud.
Yeah.
And Cal, you're right. That is the definition of trauma and what we call PTSD.
Gosh, the emotional weight, just the weight of that on a child, yeah. I was thinking back on when I first started working with you, and you had an employee, and her first initial was L, and she was a good, an effective employee. I remember you were happy with her work. She loved working with you. She moved out of state. And on one of my meetings with her, when we were trying to work through how these trainings would look, and just I was learning about the program and picking her brain. She had taught in California. She had taught in downtown LA. She was working with a lot of, youth who could, a lot of gang life there. And she said, after working in your program, working as one of your folks, she said, think of all the time, had I known about this, almost like guilt, like I should have known better. She was teaching reading. Had I known about Now Foundations in that classroom setting, I did the best I could, but I wasn't trained in this. Think of all those kids
Yeah.
who would not have maybe made those choices. Think of those kids who wouldn't be living on the streets because I could have made such a difference had I just had this knowledge.
Yes.
And then when we think about that and all the hours that people have spent just
Memorizing. And for many kids, it doesn't work. That's not how the brain is designed. It's not a memorization system.
right.
And you're really not giving it the foundational language processing skills it needs to build the reading skills. It's the speech skills first, the reading skills second. It's the phonological skills first. It's the letters and sounds, reading, spelling skills second, third, and fourth. That's that hierarchy.
Yeah. Amazing.
Well, Angela shared a message with us as well, that her first learner was an adult who had physical challenges. And she wanted to read and write because she worked at Burger King. And she wanted to have better functional skills. And like Angela says, she's proud of her, and we are too. So part of the reason we're doing this podcast and this topic is to make sure that adults know there's never a point in your age that we cannot change your reading skills. There's one major factor that will dictate whether the reading impact or the reading program is effective. Has the program been tested and proven to be highly effective? And I don't mean that the publisher, Pro Literacy or somebody did a sample with 10 adults and they got better. Pretty much any program you do with any adults for any period of time is going to see some progress. But the question is, have you closed the gap? Are they actually now reading closer to their IQ level? And they don't struggle as much anymore, and the self-esteem changes, and the belief in their abilities and their belief in their own intelligence changes. It increases as soon as you take the reading skills and increase the reading skills as well.
Yeah, the self-esteem, the confidence, and some might think, well, those are those soft things. Does that really matter? Yes, it does, because in education, the affective filter, if that is so high, you're not letting anything in because the stress, the trauma, whatever. If you're comfortable, if you're confident, that allows people to learn. That's one thing I really love about working with adults. It's just my preference. I just love working with adults because you can speak to them about the issue. You can talk about all this, they're smart. They have some background knowledge that they could take in this information. I will never forget when we were launching the Now Foundations training at the library, and we invited you to come and speak to our learners who are already in the program. And I said, he's a clinical, neuropsychologist. He did this program. He is we were close to UF where location wise. Come and ask Dr. Tim Conway. And that room was full. And well, can you help me? Because I always do this. Can you help me? Because I did this in school and I confused this. And when you would talk about, look, I help architects, and they're like, okay, I think he can help me, and always the question, do you think you can't learn? When do you think you stop learning?
Right.
That always gets them. They're like, okay. And it's a trust thing. And that was
that's very powerful. When they've had so many struggles, it's hard not to think that it's not going to be possible. And Theresa, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but this is our new app that right now we've just launched the kid version of the app. This is for 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. While they play this app, they learn lip poppers and tongue tappers and tongue scrapers. And there's animation to it. It's engaging. We're in the process of getting ready to build the adult version. So the adults will be able to do this as well. It won't look like Lucky the Lion. We'll use something that's more adult appropriate as opposed to Lucky the Lion's taking you through lip letter land. We'll use more adult-like terminology, more adult-like animation, graphic design. But we basically have to do the same wiring for a 60-year-old that we're going to do for this 4, 5, and 6-year-old. And so this app is now one way we're actually making it possible for more people to build that foundational system. And it's at the whopping price of $6.99 a month. Or for the annual purchase, because if you're going to use it for a year, we'll give you a discount. Then it's only going to be $49.99 for a whole year of access to it. And if that's not enough, and I sound like a late night TV commercial now, if that's not enough, you get 2. No, with this one, it is, if you buy the subscription, it's not just for one person to play it. You can actually have 4 people on the app.
Oh my gosh.
So if there's a family, little kids, and dad's like, yeah, I'm dyslexic, and he got my dyslexia. Dad can have an account and the child can have an account, and they can begin to build their skills, but soon we'll have the adult version as well. And this is going to help us have a markedly bigger impact on literacy
Oh, yes.
because it's more easily accessible and it always does it correctly. Now, it's really not as good as having a person face to face. And I know we've left the listeners hanging right now, Theresa, which is they're going to want to know before we end this podcast, what happened to Marie? Marie comes in, she tells you that she's desperate to learn to read. She doesn't have a job. Her marriage is falling apart. Her kids are grown. She does not want to be a burden to her kids. And if she doesn't learn to read, she's going to take herself off this planet. What happened as she progressed?
Yes. So when I left the library, she was still working with her tutor. And it had been, I mean, she took a while because she had some other challenges. I believe it was a solid 2 years that Diana was working with her, a year and a half maybe.
So she was sticking to it.
She stayed with it. And when I left, she was still, I mean, they look forward to working together. They still work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know she's still there.
And was she learning to read?
She was making her progress. Again, as I said, there were some cognitive things there.
Yes.
And that a library can't tackle with volunteer tutors, but she did make progress.
Those are the things we need. Yeah, we need an OT for. We need a speech therapist.
Exactly.
That's what our medical team does at the morriscenter.com or the Morris Center clinics, but that's usually not in an adult program in a library system.
No, not implemented by volunteers for sure. So, but she was still there working, happy, just looking forward to her lessons. And I mean, and there's that, that affects, yes, she was making progress, but she was also building confidence and self-esteem. So even if she was not at the point of reading, full magazines or thick books or reading to her grandkids, she had some other affective, emotional strengths that could then give her the strength to exit a situation, leave a marriage, move, get her own place kind of thing. Because there were other things going on too. Not that we're trying to be social workers or anything like that, but it is related to everything,
And what kind of bond did the tutors make with the learners as the learners were progressing?
Yeah. Diana was her tutor. Diana, if you recall, brilliant young woman. And just this Now Foundations clicked with her. She owned it, and it was just natural for her. She just loved working with her. She just worked with her for a very long time. She would ride her bike to that town to meet with her when her car was down. And she was going to school during all of this. It was just, it's a unique bond. Bond. And, it's, what was great about it too, was this was a program that these tutors had to take that intensive training.
Right.
So it was kind of like, I'm not going to be perfect. I will make mistakes too, but that makes it, I'm human too. We're all not perfect. So that gave power to the relationship dynamic as well. It was not a hierarchy thing. It was not, so that's a really important thing too. And
it sounds like a real team collaboration.
Absolutely.
The instructor or the tutor and the learner, they're the team. They're working on it together. And it makes a huge difference when the program has been tested, scientifically proven to work. And that Now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling, we do that in many different environments, but we also offer it online with the ed tech company, nowprograms.com. And if it's going to sound odd to me, an adult, for me to tell you this, but if you can go find 3 friends who also have reading struggles and you want to all do this together, we'll put 4 of you online together as a team, and it's only going to cost you $30 an hour per person. And so we've got trying to get lower price points or access points, but give me a couple months and we'll be launching a new app that's actually geared towards adult literacy and helping build their skills as adults. So there'll be more and more things coming down the pipeline that don't just say, accept what you got, focus on your strengths, don't talk about your weaknesses. It says, let's do what everybody's trying to do. Every person, whether you have reading problems or not, is always trying to improve your skills. And if you get expert level training by a very skilled, advanced trainer, you're more likely to build better skills. And that's basically what that Now Foundations program is through nowprograms.com is we've got experts in this program ready to sit down with you and help you build those skills, change those skills, because your brain is not the problem. All the adults who struggle to read today were failed by a system that it's not required, even to this day, is not required to only buy programs scientifically proven by randomized controlled trials that the literacy program works for the majority of students. So it was the chronic use of untested, unproven, ineffective programs that have caused so many adults to mistakenly believe that dyslexia is lifelong. We have a podcast about this, and this is the podcast. Many times I'm talking to past students in this podcast, Dyslexia Success Stories. We've brought back students who we treated when they were 10 and they're now 40. When they were 8 and they're now 28. When they were 12, now they're 26. And you get to hear them tell you themselves how we changed their reading skills and how that allowed them, not us, it allowed them to change their life, to do more, to achieve more, to set more goals, and to have the independence to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. So exciting.
So we've got about a minute left, Theresa. What do you think would be the last comments you would want to make to other folks who are in the library system who are still trying to get effective adult programs? How do you get through the obstacles? How did you convince your group to fund this unusual, unheard of program? Any words of advice you have for other folks working in adult basic ed?
Yes, and there's not enough time to say it because I couldn't sit still when you told me about the app for adults. I didn't know that was coming because my mind is thinking, to train tutors, train volunteers to do it. That's hard because it has to be with fidelity.
Yep.
And people would do their own things sometimes. How could we, but every learner can't afford maybe, although you make great allowances to try to accept everybody.
A lot.
What about, first of all, it's convincing your administration. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Yeah. If we're going to do it and people are going to spend all this time, let's have them actually learn to read. That's your biggest argument right there.
Right.
We could just punch the clock and do stuff, but you know what? It's outputs versus outcomes. That's just activity. That's just busyness. Let's actually teach people to read. And now, I could see so many things with the app. Train your staff, facilitate small groups using the app or one-on-one, and then it is controlled, but someone has to, there are so many options now. I couldn't sit still. I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to get this in libraries? Because folks, Lawbook isn't working.
Yeah, right. Those old programs that are phonics driven, phonics is important, don't get me wrong. But in the analogy of building a house, the phonics are not the foundation. Phonics are second and third story. The foundation for every brain everywhere in the world is you speak a language first, and then you read and spell it later. And we have a nice comment from Michelle, and she says she's excited about the adult version. Right, then I have to let another cat out of the bag. What's going to happen after the adult app is we now have so many hours of training that we've done with adults and kids. We actually are going to train an AI engine to do many parts of the actual program itself. And we're going to build an avatar, and we're going to create avatar instructors because they never deviate. They're never sick. They never miss a day of work. And they'll do it with great fidelity because we build out the reasoning and problem-solving skills. And as you know, Theresa, the program runs with this Socratic questioning back and forth. And we know we can train the AI engine from all this that we have and put the avatar on the front end, and the avatar will be able to take you through the majority of the training program. And that will make it even more available to more people, web-based, computer-based, and highly effective, higher fidelity, and maybe only need 1 hour a day, 1 hour a week, or 1 hour a month to check in with a real person, make sure things are going as best they can be going.
There you go.
So we have more technology coming. Our goal is we're changing that number of 43 to 51 million of illiterate to massively less.
Yeah.
We know that 65% of children and middle schoolers and 65% of high schoolers do not read proficiently. And that's the data we've had collected every 3 to 4 years across every state in the United States for more than 53 years.
Yeah.
So we are going to make some big changes in actually helping give the educators the tools they need to be successful. Here's another analogy, Theresa. I tell people, how successful would the pediatrician be taking care of kids who he's done a culture of their throat? The culture says it's strep throat, but we won't give the pediatrician penicillin. how effective is he going to be or
Right.
she going to be? And it's
Mhm.
going to be like not that effective, because before we had penicillin, strep throat was a common cause of death because
Mm.
it got worse and worse and worse, and they had no treatments for it. But once we used science to build these highly effective treatments, and we got them to the physicians, and they knew there's 10 days of treatment that has to happen for penicillin to work, don't change it. And they understood how to follow that.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
But
Why not
Teresa,
with
it's been a pleasure to catch up with you.
such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Now I'm on fire. Every time we chat, I just am on fire. So thank you. Thank you so much. This has been just an honor and a pleasure.
My pleasure. And I thank you for taking a chance with us so many years ago and helping adults in a basic literacy program get better literacy skills, because we know it's going to be generational. As
Oh,
they
yeah.
improve their skills, it helps them have better relationships with their kids, have better
Right.
incomes, get better jobs, more likely better self-esteem. There's so many positive things. And here's a number that the financial people should be hanging on. We believe that learning difficulties like illiteracy, whether it's dyslexic or what we call instructional casualties, they never got a good program,
Mhm.
cost the US government about $2.2 trillion in ungenerated revenue.
Yeah.
Because they're not able to perform at the level they're capable of performing. It hinders their ability to actually contribute in ways that they actually might help them be even more financially more successful.
Yeah.
So we will gain $2.2 trillion in the economy when we have more people reading at higher rates.
I
And it's
believe.
coming.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
All right.
Real.
Well, that wraps it up. Another episode of Dyslexia Success Stories. Again, thank you, Theresa Sterling, librarian, literacy expert of past career, still journalistic and then literacy of the journalistic sorts in your current career.
Right.
And we will have another show next week. And that's the other podcast. It's at 5 p.m. And that's Dyslexia Discussions and More. We talk about current topics, current research, current findings. And we'll have guests on that show sometimes as well. 2 weeks from today, at this same time at noon, we will have another guest. And this is going to be someone who actually have already put them through intervention. They're going to come back and tell you what happened. And we'll find out when we see the guest, is it somebody that we empowered a week ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? We've been doing this since 1986,
Wow.
myself personally, and others way before me. And so we have thousands of people to choose from that we've actually already empowered their dyslexia or empowered their literacy. And we want them to come tell you, the viewers, their story of success, so more people know literacy is life-changing, and there's never a time when we cannot make that change.
That's right.
All right. Thanks again, Theresa. Thanks
All right.
everyone who joined in. We'll see you all again next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.